I went undercover in my own tech startup, and what I found shocked me. Hey everyone, long-time lurker, first-time poster. I've been sitting on this experience for a while, unsure whether to share it, but I think it might help some of you in leadership positions, or really, anyone working in a stressful startup environment. I'm the founder and CEO of a mid-sized tech startup. We build AI-powered project management tools, and on paper, things are going great. Our user base is growing, investors are happy, and the press has been kind to us. But internally, I had a nagging feeling something was off. I'd hear little things in passing, whispers about burnout, some senior developers leaving unexpectedly, and an overall sense of exhaustion. My exec team assured me that it was just startup life, and that people were committed to the mission. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. So, I did something a little crazy. I decided to go undercover. Obviously, I couldn't just waltz into my own office and start asking questions, so I created a fake identity, Jake, a junior developer on contract. With the help of HR, who only knew I was testing workplace culture, not my full plan, I set up a temporary profile in our system, gave myself a generic employee badge, and joined the company as a new remote hire. I showed up to my first virtual team stand-up feeling ridiculously nervous. Would someone recognize my voice? Would my CTO call me out? But the sad reality? No one even noticed me. I was just another junior dev drowning in Jira tickets. And that's when things got interesting. The onboarding process was a mess. I didn't even get access to the codebase until my second day. No one introduced themselves or explained expectations. My assigned buddy, a mid-level engineer, sent me a Slack message that just said, "Hey, let me know if you have any questions." That was it. By day 3, I realized something even worse. Everyone was overworked. Like, badly. Meetings were a blur of exhausted faces, stand-ups were robotic status updates, and there was this constant unspoken pressure to always be online. One of my teammates casually mentioned working until 2 a.m. the night before, and no one even blinked. It was just normal. I started DMing people, trying to get a sense of how they were feeling. What I heard broke me a little. I love the work, but I haven't seen my friends in weeks. My manager is great, but I'm scared to tell him I'm struggling. If I don't answer Slack after 9 p.m., I feel guilty. How did I let it get this bad? But the real gut punch came at the end of the week. One of the senior engineers, let's call him David, stayed on a call with me after a code review. He sighed and said, "Man, I envy you. You're just a contractor. You can walk away from this." That hit hard. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying everything I had seen, everything I had heard. I had built this company to be different. To be the kind of place where brilliant people could thrive. But somehow, in chasing growth, I had created a pressure cooker. And then, something happened that forced my hand. The moment that forced my hand came late at night, at the end of my first week as Jake. I wasn't expecting much when I logged onto Slack around 11 p.m., just curious to see if anyone else was still online. Maybe 1 or 2 night owls wrapping up. But as my screen loaded, my stomach dropped. Half my team was still working. Not just idly hanging around, but actively committing code, responding to messages, debating product fixes for a deadline that wasn't even urgent yet. It wasn't just late-night passion, it was obligation. They felt like they had no choice. Then, at 11:30, something happened that made it all click. David, the senior engineer who had confided in me earlier, posted in the team chat, "Hey everyone, I know we're all grinding, but please take care of yourselves. This is starting to get unhealthy." Immediately, a manager replied, "We're in crunch time, David. We all need to step up." Another teammate added, "I appreciate the reminder, but yeah, we don't really have a choice, do we?" That was it. No argument. No discussion. Just quiet acceptance that this was normal. That this was the price of working here. I sat back, staring at my screen, feeling sick. My company wasn't just a place where people worked hard, it was a place where they felt trapped. Where exhaustion wasn't a red flag, just part of the culture. And worse? I had created it. That realization hit like a punch to the gut. I hadn't meant for it to happen, of course. I'd never told anyone they had to work insane hours. I'd never said that burnout was expected. But that's the thing about company culture, it's not about what you say. It's about what people believe they have to do to survive. And somewhere along the way, I had let this belief take root. I couldn't just sit back and watch anymore. It was time to act. The next morning, in our daily stand-up, I decided to push back in the only way I could, without breaking my cover. Keeping my voice casual, I said, "Hey, I noticed a lot of people were online super late last night. Are we expecting to work overtime on this sprint?" The silence that followed told me everything. Finally, the same manager who had shut down David's message the night before spoke up. "Not officially. But we do what we need to do." A few people nodded. No one challenged it. And that's when I realized, no one actually believed they could challenge it. I waited until after stand-up and messaged David. "Hey, you made a good point last night. Do people ever push back on this?" His response came almost immediately. "LOL. No. That's not how it works here." That was the moment I knew I'd failed. I had built a company where people didn't feel safe questioning things. Where working themselves to exhaustion wasn't just tolerated, but expected. And the worst part? They thought I didn't care. I needed to understand more, so I started talking to managers too. Sarah, one of our engineering leads, admitted the truth outright. She told me she hated this culture, but felt powerless to fix it. If she encouraged people to log off, they would just ignore her out of fear of falling behind. And honestly, the pressure wasn't coming from her. It was coming from the top. That stung. Because the top? That was me. I kept digging. New hires were burning out in 6 months. Managers were afraid to enforce work-life balance. People who tried to set boundaries were quietly labeled as not committed enough. But the thing that got to me the most was a conversation with another developer, Marcus. He said, "The execs don't care as long as we hit our numbers. They probably don't even know how bad it is." He was right. I hadn't known. But that was the problem, wasn't it? I should have known. I should have noticed before it got this bad. I had seen enough. I was done pretending. It was time to come clean. And I knew exactly how I was going to do it. Coming clean wasn't going to be easy. I couldn't just walk into an all-hands meeting and announce, "Hey everyone, surprise. I've actually been working undercover for the past few weeks, and by the way, we have a serious burnout problem." That would only make people defensive. If I wanted real change, I had to approach this carefully. So, I started with the managers. I scheduled a leadership meeting under the pretense of a strategy check-in. Once everyone was on the call, our CTO, product leads, engineering managers, I took a deep breath and dropped the act. "Before we dive into product updates, I need to be honest about something," I said. "For the past few weeks, I've been working undercover as a junior developer." Silence. Some of them laughed, thinking I was joking. But when they saw I wasn't smiling, the mood in the room shifted. I could see the realization sink in, the "oh crap" moment as they replayed every complaint, every Slack message, every late-night comment that had gone unchecked. "I did this because I needed to see for myself what it's like to work here," I continued. And what I saw, honestly, it scared me. People are exhausted. They're afraid to push back. They think speaking up will cost them their jobs. And worst of all, they believe leadership, us, doesn't care. A long pause. Then, our CTO spoke up. "I mean, startup life is hard. That's just how it is, right?" That hit a nerve. I shook my head. "No. That's how we've allowed it to be. But it doesn't have to be this way." A few managers shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded, as if they'd been waiting for this conversation but never thought it would actually happen. One engineering manager, Sarah, who I had spoken to earlier, finally spoke up. "I've been saying for months that we're pushing people too hard, but I didn't think anything would actually change." That stung. If my own managers didn't think change was possible, what did that say about the culture we'd built? "Then let's change it," I said. We spent the next hour unpacking everything: why people felt pressured to work late, why managers weren't enforcing work-life balance, and what we could actually do to fix it. I could feel the tension starting to lift as we finally addressed the issue head-on. But I knew this was just the first step. The real challenge was telling the team. I decided to do it in a company-wide meeting the next day. No PR spin. No sugarcoating. Just the truth. When everyone logged on, I didn't waste time. I have something important to share with you all, I began. For the past few weeks, I've been working undercover as a junior developer. And what I saw, it honestly broke me. I told them everything. How people were afraid to take breaks. How exhaustion had become the norm. How even the managers felt powerless to stop it. And most of all, how they believed I didn't care. That's on me, I admitted. I let this happen. And I want to fix it. The chat exploded. Some people were shocked. Others validated everything I had said. But the one comment that hit me the hardest was from David, the senior engineer who had told me he envied me for being a contractor. "I can't believe you actually saw it," he wrote. "And I can't believe you're actually doing something about it." That's when I knew we were onto something real. I wasn't just here to acknowledge the problem, I was here to fix it. And the next step? Making sure no one ever felt like they had to choose between their health and their job again. After the all-hands meeting, I half expected backlash. I thought people might be angry, call it a stunt, or worse, assume it was just another empty promise from leadership. But something unexpected happened. People started talking. For the first time, employees were openly discussing burnout, late nights, and the unspoken pressure to always be online. The Slack channels were filled with conversations that had never made it to the surface before. I thought I was the only one struggling like this. It's not just engineering, even product teams feel like we can't log off. Is this actually going to change, or is this just one of those let's talk about it and move on moments? That last comment stung, but it was fair. People had no reason to trust that I'd follow through. And I couldn't just expect them to believe me, I had to show them. So the next morning, I called another leadership meeting and made it clear, we're not just tweaking policies. We're fixing the foundation. The first thing to go? Our always-on culture. I implemented a new rule: no Slack messages, emails, or work notifications after 6 p.m. in our main time zones. If it wasn't urgent, it could wait until morning. Some managers hesitated. One even said, "That sounds great, but people are going to ignore it. They'll just keep working." I shook my head. Not if we set the example. If leadership logs off, employees will too. And if they don't, their managers need to tell them to stop. The second change? Mandatory, protected time off. People weren't taking PTO because they felt guilty leaving their teams understaffed. So we overhauled our vacation policy. Managers were required to proactively schedule time off for employees who hadn't taken any in a while. And if someone worked late on a project, they got a mandatory extra day off. No exceptions. By the end of the meeting, I could see it. Managers were cautiously optimistic. But I also knew talk wasn't enough. We had to prove it in real time. And the perfect test came sooner than expected. That night, around 9 p.m., I checked Slack out of habit. Sure enough, a handful of engineers were still online, discussing a bug fix. And then, just as I was about to intervene, something incredible happened. Sarah, the engineering manager, chimed in. "Hey guys, this can wait until morning. Log off and get some rest." David replied, "You sure? We're close to fixing it." "I'm sure," she wrote back. "If we're serious about changing things, it starts now. See you all in the morning." One by one, they logged off. I sat there staring at my screen, realizing that for the first time, something was actually different. This wasn't just policy. This wasn't just leadership saying the right things. This was real. But just when I thought things were turning around, I got hit with something I didn't expect. One of my top executives, someone I had trusted for years, wasn't happy about any of it. "We're moving too fast with these changes," they told me the next day. "We have aggressive targets. If people start pulling back, we're going to fall behind." I had a choice to make. I could back down and ease into the changes, making them more of a suggestion than a real shift. Or I could hold the line and prove that our success as a company didn't have to come at the cost of our employees' well-being. I think you know which one I chose. I knew some resistance was coming, but I didn't expect it from my own executive team. "We can't just flip a switch and expect productivity to stay the same," one of them argued. "If we loosen expectations too much, people will take advantage." I felt my jaw tighten. Take advantage of what? Basic work-life balance. No one responded. This was the real battle, not just changing policies, but changing mindsets. Some leaders still believed that relentless hustle was necessary, that if we stopped pushing so hard, the company would suffer. But I refused to let fear dictate our culture. People don't do their best work when they're exhausted, I said. If we lose a little short-term output while we fix this, so be it. If we don't fix it, we're going to lose good people permanently. There was some grumbling, but I made it clear, these changes weren't optional. This was the company we were building, and if they weren't on board, they needed to rethink whether they belonged here. A few days later, I got my answer. One of my execs resigned. I don't think this is the company I signed up for, they told me. That stung. But as I watched employees start logging off on time, taking real breaks, and showing up more engaged than before, I knew one thing for sure. This was exactly the company I wanted to build. Losing an executive over these changes wasn't easy. It shook some people. A few managers quietly reached out, asking if we were really sticking with this plan or if things would go back to normal in a few weeks. That was exactly the problem. Normal wasn't working. I doubled down. We held new leadership meetings focused only on employee well-being. I personally met with department heads, making sure they understood that this wasn't just a phase, it was the future of our company. We tracked productivity, not by who worked the longest hours, but by actual impact. And most importantly, I encouraged managers to have real conversations with their teams. The shift wasn't instant. Some employees hesitated to take time off, worried they'd still be judged for it. Others continued logging in late at night out of habit. But then, little by little, things started to change. I remember one moment in particular. It was a Friday afternoon, and David, the same engineer who had once told me he envied contractors for being able to walk away, sent a message in Slack. Logging off early today. No emergencies, no last-minute tasks. Just going to spend time with my family. See you all Monday. A few months ago, that message wouldn't have existed. But now? The responses were full of thumbs-up emojis, clapping hands, and even a "have a great weekend, man," from a manager. I knew then that we were making progress. But not everyone was convinced. About a month into our changes, one of our biggest investors called me. They had noticed the shift, employees logging off earlier, fewer late-night commits, and a new emphasis on work-life balance. And they weren't thrilled. "We're concerned this might slow growth," they said. "Your team has always been one of the hardest working groups in our portfolio. Are you sure you want to risk that?" It took everything in me not to laugh. I knew what they were really asking. Are you sure people will work as hard if they're not scared of burning out? I didn't hesitate. If happy, well-rested employees are a risk, then I'll take that risk every time. I braced for a fight, but to my surprise, they backed off. Maybe they expected me to waver, to say this was just an experiment. But I had seen the alternative, and I wasn't going back. A few weeks later, our first big test came, one of our most critical product launches. Normally, this would have meant chaos, sleepless nights, and engineers glued to their laptops at all hours. But this time, we planned differently. We set realistic deadlines. We had backup teams for after-hours issues, so no one had to be always on. And most importantly, we trusted our people. The launch was one of the smoothest we'd ever had. No all-nighters. No frantic last-minute scrambling. And the best part? The team was actually excited about it. There was a celebration Slack thread, employees sharing pictures of their launch day setups, some at home with their families, some at coffee shops, all of them present. That's when I knew for certain, this wasn't just working. It was making us better. Of course, there were still challenges. A few people left, unable to adjust to the shift. Some managers had to unlearn years of toxic habits. And yes, there were moments where we had to remind ourselves that success doesn't mean more hours, it means better work. But something incredible happened along the way. We started attracting top-tier talent, not because of insane salaries or flashy perks, but because word got out that we were different. That we didn't burn people out. That we valued our employees as humans, not just machines. Retention improved. Morale skyrocketed. And our performance? We didn't just keep up. We grew faster than ever. And to think, I never would have seen any of this if I hadn't gone undercover. Looking back, I still can't believe how close I came to missing all of it, the late nights, the quiet suffering, the way my own people felt trapped in a company I built with the intention of empowering them. It took going undercover as a junior developer to finally see what was happening. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. So what happened after all of this? Well, we didn't just change a few policies and move on. We built an entirely new foundation for how we work. 6 months after my undercover experience, employee retention had doubled. Performance reviews showed overwhelming improvements in morale. And despite cutting down on overtime and constant urgency, our productivity hadn't suffered, it had actually improved. Teams were shipping better work faster, because they weren't exhausted. But the biggest shift wasn't in numbers. It was in trust. People finally believed leadership cared. Not because of words, but because of actions. Employees no longer hesitated to take PTO. Managers no longer felt pressured to enforce grind culture. And the late-night Slack messages? Practically gone. I still think about something David, the burned-out senior engineer, told me a few months later. I used to think success meant sacrificing everything. But I finally feel like I can do great work and have a life. That's the first time I've ever felt that way at a startup. That hit me hard. Because isn't that what work should be? A place where people can do their best without breaking themselves in the process? So here's what I've learned. Culture isn't about what's written in a mission statement. It's about the unspoken rules, the ones people feel but don't always say out loud. And as leaders, we don't get to define that culture with our words. We define it with what we allow. If I had never gone undercover, I might have never realized what I was allowing to happen right under my nose. And now? I'll never make that mistake again. So to any other CEOs or managers reading this, if you really want to know what's going on in your company, don't just rely on reports or all-hands meetings. Find a way to see it for yourself. Because what you find might shock you. It sure shocked me. And for those wondering, yes, I eventually revealed my cover to the whole company. Their reactions? Priceless. But that's a story for another time.